Recording in progress.
So initially it should able to accept any type. Once you assign a type, it should work only for the type. Then what should be the data type? You cannot initialize. If you initialize number, all number only. You have to declare. Suppose if I mention 10 or 0, it is what type? Number type. So you have to declare its data type is open to handle any type. But once it knows the type, it should not allow any another type. It should not allow any another type. Then how you design any data type reference in such a way that it can accept any type, but it should be strongly typed. Accept any type means initially it is open for any data type. Once it knows the data, then it should be working only for that data. We have to design the memory reference in such a way that it is open to any type and it is strongly typed. Both behavior should work. Until you assign a value, it is open to any type. Once you assign a value, it should work only for that particular type. This nature is called as generic. We call this as generic. Actually, generic refers to type safe. Generic refers to type safe. It refers to type safe. So generic is going to refer type safe. So type safe is nothing but the concept of type safe means generic types are open to handle any data, type, are open to handle any data type. However, it can be strongly typed. So it can be strongly typed based on the value assigned. However, it can be strongly typed based on the value assigned. They are open to handle any data type, and however, it can be strongly typed also based on the value assigned. That is the nature of generic. So you should declare the memory in such a way that it is ready for any data type. And once you send the data, it should work only for that data type. That is the nature of generic. Actually, generic behavior can be defined, generic behavior can be defined for variables, properties, methods, parameters, functions, classes. So the behavior generic can be defined for a variable. Variables can be generic, the properties can be generic, methods can be generic, parameters can be generic, functions can be generic, and classes can be generic. Actually, in some programming languages which support generic, their constructor also can be generic, but not in TypeScript. In TypeScript, constructor cannot be generic. Usually, constructor also can be generic, but TypeScript will not allow generic constructors. So, because when it is using with the JavaScript translation, so it will not allow generic constructors. So, how you declare any variable or any reference in such a way that it can work like this? That means open for any data type, but it should fix for specific type, strongly typed. So, usually to configure that syntactically here, generic references are created using the angle bracket like this, using the angle bracket and type are created using this type. So which refers to open data type, which refers to open data type. So you can initialize the type. So during compile time or runtime, you have both facilities. At compile time, you can mention the type, or at runtime also we can define the type. If runtime a data type is changing, then we call them as dynamic types. In many programming languages, dynamic types are not supported. Now, latest all programming languages are introducing a dynamic data types. Recently, all languages are introducing dynamic types. So I'm not sure about Java and all, but .NET, other languages have dynamic data types. Dynamic data types means the type of a value can be determined at the time of running the application. That means at compile time, data type is not determined. At runtime, it is determined. So they are called dynamic data types. So how you can define this, how you can configure? That means here syntactically, we have a property. So that means we have a property. This property can be defined with a generic type, T or type or anything. In the angle bracket, so whatever you mention is referred as data type. So you can use any word, any character. Traditionally for data types, we use T or we write as what type. It doesn't matter. Anything you can define. So similarly, so for a method or a function, so that means for a method, you can configure the type. Even for a class, you can define the type. Classes also can be configured with the type. So generic types are defined in this way. A property can have type, method can have type, class can be configured as type. So let's see one example here, means how they work. For example, now what we want is We want a function, and we want this function to take some title, some print is the function. This print function is having a value. Now I want this function in such a way that it can work according to the data type. That means it should able to work for a string, it should able to work for a number or boolean, like that. Then what we can do is we can make the type, this is the type, and the value will be of the same data type. So now I want to return that, or I want to perform certain operation on that. That means I will return the value, whatever the value is there. Now, whenever you try to access the print, print is open for any kind of data. So now this print have to work for a string. We pass the string, then automatically the value becomes a string type only. That means the data type of the parameter depends on the type of memory you allocated for the print. That means now you cannot have a number. You need to define only a string. Suppose I am accessing the print and pass a number into it, then the value becomes number type. You cannot have a string. You have to pass only a value into this number. So it is open for any data type. And once you configure the type, it is fixed for that particular type. So this is a generic function. Here, the function is generic, and here the value is generic, parameter is generic. So at the time of accessing the function, you mention the type, it will fix the data for the type. Initially, it is open for any type. Once you know the type, it can work for that particular type. One best example is, suppose you are using, suppose you are using fetch method. Suppose you are using the fetch method. This fetch method is expecting URL, and it have a then. It is expecting response. This response is always in binary form. We have another then which gets the response. So this response is always in JSON form. Now, actually, what is the response type of this? Suppose you are sending some products data. This will work for products. If you are sending some categories, then it will work for categories. That means how this parameter can change its type, how it can change its type, how it can work for products, how it can work for categories. Remember, it doesn't know about the type of data that comes until or unless the response is converted into JSON. Once the response is converted into JSON, this then method have a response. This response will be strongly typed only for products or only for categories. Because when you are creating a map and reading, then it is strongly typed only for that particular type. How this is possible? How we can create a function in such a way that it can accept any type? and but it should be strongly typed. How we can define like that? Let's see one example here. This is basic syntactical example. I am giving a syntactical example here. Let's do one thing. We have an interface I product type. In this, we have a product name string and product price as number. I have another interface, interface I employee type. It have a first name, so it is a string, and it is a designation, that is also a string, and some salary, that is a number. Now I want to create a function called get data. This function should accept the data, and it should able to return the data. Now the point is, I want this get data to work for any type of data. I want it to work for any kind of data. It may be product, it may be employee, it may be student. For handling three different types of data, we cannot create three functions. For employee, one function, for product, another function. We want only one function which should work for all. Then what we will do is we will make it generic type. And the data that comes in will be the generic type. And what it should do is it should return the data. Whatever data comes, it should return the data. Now the point here is here, whenever you access get data function, into that you mention what type of data to handle. Suppose I mentioned the data type as I product, then automatically the data must be product type. The data must be product type. That means it is saying data must be a product type. That means you have to pass a product type. And in that, we are passing some first name, last name, not possible because it is expecting only name. And it is expecting only price. We need to configure that. Another important is, suppose several products are coming. If multiple products are coming, then I can make this I product. So I can make it I product of array type. Then automatically it is expecting an array of products. It is not one product, it is expecting multiple array of products. That means we need to pass like this. Array of what? Products. Every product must have a name, and every product must have a price. Like this, we need to configure the data. That means another product. So we should have a name, and we should have price. That's how we configure the data. So some price. That's how we define the data. Suppose I'm using get data, same method for I employee. It should work for employee now. It should work for employee. That means it should work for the employee data. So that means it will have a first name. So, and it will have a last name. So John, so it will have a designation. So, and it will have a salary. That is how we can create a function which can change according to the type. That means instead of creating so many functions, one function can handle any type. That is the nature of generics. And remember, it is just returning the data. When this function is returning, how to present it, you know. What this function is returning? This function is returning a set of products. That means it's an object. Na? When it is returning an object, I will keep console dot what log, console log, and I want to print this. Suppose for all of them I am using same console log because it is returning an array, it is returning an object. Just I am printing that. So console dot log, we are just printing all the details. Now when I run this, see cd src tsc index.ts and node index.js, and it is going to print all the data. That means first one is an product type, second time is an array of products, third one is an employee type. Any kind of data function can handle, but what is speciality is it is open to any type, but once you mention the type, it will not allow any another type. That is the nature of what generic. So a function can be generic, a function can be generic, a parameter can be generic, a parameter can be generic, so that you can create one function to handle different kinds of data, still strongly typed. The question here is, why can't you mention any type? If I mention any type, even you assign a value of one type, later it will allow any another type. We should not allow like that. Once I assign a value type, it should be fixed for that type. It should not allow any another type. Then you have to configure it as what? Generic. And here I am creating a generic function. But remember, entire class can be generic. Entire class can be generic, not just only a function. Class can be generic, properties can be generic, methods can be generic. For example, see now. Suppose this is one example. Okay. Another example, I am creating a class database. And this database class have a connection string. Connection string is the property. It is having a connection string. And we have to print. So we have a print method which should print the connection string. This print is a void type. It's an void type. Okay. Now I want this database class in such a way that it can work for any database. Suppose we have Oracle, MySQL, so then MongoDB, like the different databases. I want this class to work for any of these database. But once I mention that it should work for Oracle, then this connection string should be accepting only Oracle parameters. The connection string should be accepting Oracle parameters. If I mention database as MySQL, it should be only MySQL connection string. That means connection string is not a fixed. It can change according to the database. So now how you can create a class in such a way that its properties will be changing, their data type. How a class can be designed in such a way that the properties data type will be changing. What you can do is you can make this class as generic. You can make the class as generic. Then the properties also can be generic. Can be generic. Why it is showing error? Because if you don't pass any value, then what is its type? When you pass a value, it is generic. If you don't pass a value into it, then what is its type? That means you should say it is generic or what type? Null type. Then by default, what is the type? Null. Why null? Can we define undefined also? We can mention undefined also, but we are giving null because we are expecting at runtime. At runtime, we will send the data into it, then it will decide the data type. That's the reason we have to configure as null. You know that this is a union of type. Why a property is mentioned, need to be mentioned, because if you don't pass any type, by default, what should be the type? You have to specify that. That's the reason. Now see the interesting part here. We have an interface that is iOracle is the interface. Oracle connection have so user ID. So it is a string type. It will have password, that is a string type. It will have database name. It is also a string type. Whereas interface MongoDB, iMongoDB, it is going to have only URL, which is a string type, which is a string type. I want this database class to work for any database. Then what we do is we will create an object, Oracle object, and we allocate the memory for database. And into that, we will mention the type as iOracle. Then automatically what happens is the memory is allocated for Oracle type. Then automatically the connection string becomes an Oracle connection string. It's an Oracle type. It is an Oracle type. That means into this, you cannot pass any another value. You can see what errors it is saying. It is saying that Oracle connection string is missing with user ID, password, and database. That means you need to mention the database user ID. So user ID is some Scott, and password is some tiger like this. And database is what? Some EMPDB something. This is how we configure, and we need to print it. That means this print have to print for var property in this dot what connection string, and we need to print console.log. We need to print the property, and we need to print this dot connection string of property. We can print the property and details. Now what we are doing is, after this, we just use Oracle dot print. It is going to print that Oracle connection. Now similarly, I created Mongo. Mongo is equal to new database. Into that, I will pass iMongoDB. Then automatically memory is allocated for MongoDB. Automatically this Mongo connection string becomes a Mongo connection string. It is expecting what it is URL. That means it is open for any data type and it is strongly typed. Now you need to pass the URL here. URL is a string HTTP, not HTTP, MongoDB :/12700127017. Like this, I'm just configuring this. And Mongo dot what print. That's how we are defined. Now complete class is generic, in that all the properties can be same type. Your wish. It is not necessary that all the properties must be same type, but the memory is completely allocated for a specific type. So one class can work for different data, different kind of data. Actually, we created like this manually. I showed you polymorphism in classes. When I showed polymorphism in class, I showed you one object can use the memory of multiple classes. In one index, it can work for one class. In another index, it can work for another. But this is now more simple and easy. Through generic, you can manage. Now, let's print this and see usually. So TSC index and node, and you can see it is going to print that. It is not printing this one. We are not using Mongo also print is there na? We haven't saved it. After modification, I haven't saved it. Let me save that and run. So now it is going to print those details, the URL, and this is for the Oracle. That means you can have a class as what type? Generic. So functions can be generic, classes can be generic, properties can be generic, parameters also can be generic. But here one problem is that what is the problem is you cannot configure operators on generic types. You cannot configure operators on generic types. You have to define using functions. You cannot configure operators on generic type. That is one important point you should remember. So you have to define using functions. Cannot, right? You cannot configure. You cannot configure operators on generic type. Why we cannot configure operators on generic type? Because their type is not known. Then how you will do any operation on them? Until or unless their type is known, you cannot do any operation. If type is unknown, you can't do any operation on that. So you see now here, for example, suppose we have a function addition is a generic type, A is generic type, B also generic type. And return, what we are returning is A plus B. It is invalid. Why? Because how you will add or concat A and B without knowing what is A and B? So that means it is not valid. Then how we can design in such a way that if it is a string, it will concat. If it is a number, it will add. How to handle the operation now? So you cannot perform directly operations here. Addition or multiplication or division, you cannot do. Then what we do is we create a function sum. This have A any type and it have B any type. And what we do is we return A plus B. Now it is valid there. Now this sum we will use here, and that sum into that we pass A and B. That's how we manage. Directly operations are not allowed on generics. You have to configure a function, in that perform the operation, and you must use that function. If you have built-in functions like you have math functions and all, you can directly use them here. String functions, math functions, array functions. You cannot do any operations on generic type. Operators are not allowed. Greater than, less than, plus, it is not allowed. Now, how do we handle that? So we are using console.log. I am using addition. Now, addition, its data type is number. Then automatically A and B are number. A and B becomes number. You say 10 comma 20, it is fine. You say console.log, we have an addition, and into that the data type is a string. Then A and B are string type. A and B are string type. For example, I am giving here first and here I am giving last. Just roughly I'm adding. That means now it is able to handle any data type, but operators are not directly allowed. So it will take a string, concatenate, it will take a number, it will do addition. So technically, so if you are writing like this, you have a function, some demo, and a generic type, A generic and B also generic. Return A plus B like this, and this is invalid. That is invalid. So you have a function demo with a generic A generic and B generic type, and return some function. This function can take A any type, so B any type like this. Means I'm just writing a function, you just put a sum, or you can write there only, or you can define here. Directly you write a function which can take and return the value. You know function can return a function. So the result of that function is returned. So this is an example for that. So one important, you have the generic. Okay. Now the key point is, remember, class can be generic, method also can be generic. In a class, method can be generic, property can be generic, parameters can be generic. I told you constructor cannot be generic, but constructor parameter can be generic. Constructors cannot be generic, but constructor parameter can be generic. For example, in the previous concept, what we done is here. In the previous concept, when we created a class database, it is a generic. And inside there is a constructor. Constructor cannot be generic, not possible. In other programming languages, we can make constructor generic. That means other programming languages means languages that support generics. They support a generic constructor, but here not possible. But the parameter of that constructor, so that means suppose it is a connection string, it can be generic. It can be generic. Then directly I am configuring. So a for, so where property in connection string. So we are reading, so console log, directly we are defining a property here. So yeah, we are defining a property. And here we are configuring connection string of property. Property and its value are printed. Now, what we do is, now when you create an Oracle class, and when you allocate the memory as database, into that generic type, it is expecting an Oracle type. For example, we have an interface I Oracle, and you have user ID, so string, and password is string, database is string. Then here you mention as I Oracle, then automatically you can see constructor is expecting Oracle connection string. That means into the constructor, you have to pass that. That means into the constructor, you need to pass. So that is user ID Scott. So password is Tiger. And database is some EMPDB. Like this we are giving. That means constructor cannot be generic, but its parameter can be generic. Previous example, we created a property generic, but now we have a constructor parameter as generic. That's it. That means directly you can access. You don't need to print because constructor itself have a print option. You created an object, constructor will execute automatically and it is going to display. So here that is one important note, right? Constructor, constructor cannot be generic type. However, its parameter can be generic. Its parameter can be generic. Constructor cannot be generic type. However, its parameter can be generic. So syntactically like this, we have a class and the class name is generic. We have a constructor and in that data can be generic. That's how we configure. Right. So here example is this one. So this is an example of configuring. That is one important you should know about generic. Generic plays key role because in React.js, majority of all the functions with the TypeScript, they are provided as generic. Even your state is generic. Your state is a generic type. Previously, we used use state. Use state can be any type. But now that becomes a generic type. That means actually how to configure the state. Suppose we are using constant. We are dealing with a collection categories and we have set categories and it is using what use state. What type of data is expected is mandatory to mention. That means in JavaScript, it is not mandatory, but in TypeScript, when you mention the state, you have to mention the type. What type of data state should handle. So here we put a string type array that is generic. Then automatically the memory will be what type? It is a string type array. The memory will be a string type array. So for example, you are dealing with products fake store type. Then the state will be fake store type. We create one fake store type and we will use that fake store type. Fake store type means what? You create a contract for fake store and we use that contract as the type. This you will see in React TypeScript. That means in React TypeScript, whenever you are dealing with majority of dynamic functions, memories, all are what type? Generic. That means they are open for any type. Previously, they will allow to assign any, but now they are fixed. One more advantage is now at compile time, at design time itself, we will know whether the property is a valid one or not. Previously, until we run, we don't know whether the property is valid or not. But now at design time itself, it is strongly typed. That is one important. Actual generics will be playing the key role in designing the complete project on React, right? So this is generics in TypeScript. Now we have another important in the TypeScript is enum, enumerations, enumeration. So enumeration is nothing but, so enum is a collection of, constants. Enum is a collection of constants. What is a constant? You know what is a constant means. A constant, we have let, var, and constants. What is the constant? Constant behavior. What is the constant nature and behavior? A constant must be initialized. A constant must be initialized with a value. And sometimes people have misunderstanding about enum, because some websites or YouTube channels tell that enum is a collection of numeric constant. That is wrong. It is not about numeric constant. It is about a constant. And actually, constants can be number, string, or expression. Constant can be a number type constant, string type constant, or an expression can be constant. Expression can be constant. So you can have string constants, you can have number constants, or you can have an expression as constant. Why you need a collection of constants? Because you want to use some values without allowing to change. That means we want to initialize values, and once the values are initialized, we don't want them to change. They need to be fixed in functionality. For example, suppose, just example, like we have like HTTP verbs. HTTP verbs are nothing but like get, like post, like put, like delete. These are all called verbs. And what is their role? Fixed. It will not change. Post is always submitting. Get is always fetching. That means, can you change them? Can you use a get for submitting? No, not possible here. Can you use a post for fetching? No. That means they initialized with a functionality. They will be fixed with that functionality. For example, we have status codes. That means 404 is fixed. It is a number fixed. For which one? Not found. Can you change the 404 for another message? Not valid. It's not possible. They are fixed. At the time of initializing memory for error codes, the values are defined, and the same values are used across any number of requests. If you want to declare some fixed set of constants and use them across requests, then better you create an enum. Enum makes the constant easily accessible. It is a collection of constants. So, and one speciality is that actually how you define, we need to use the enum. I will give here enum. We have an enumeration name, status codes. And here you will have a key and value. Key is suppose not found, and the value is 404. Like this, we can define key and values. And remember, here what is the point is, means syntax I will first give enum and a name, enum name. And here we have a key and we have a value. So what is the specialty here is, if values are numeric type, numeric type, if values are numeric type, then if values are numeric type, then they have they have auto initialization. They have auto initialization. That is one specialty. So even you don't initialize a value, they will be automatically initialized with a value. So initialized with a value. For example, I said not found, and here I am writing so not authorized, something like this. And I am not initializing a value. If I am not initializing a value, automatically the value is initialized. And the value for not authorized is 405. That means the value of previous will increment and automatically initialize for the second one. It is 405. If it is a numeric type, you just mention the starting, rest of them auto implemented. You want, you can assign a different one. For example, we say OK is equal to 200. What about not authorized now? Not authorized depends on the previous value. On the previous value, it will increment 1. For example, I defined here as suppose server error. What is the server error value? Is there any previous value for that? No. Then it will start with 0. If there is no previous value, then it will start with 0. If there is a previous value, it will increment the previous value and it will assign. That means even you don't initialize, the values are initialized. And it depends on what is the previous value. If there is no previous value, then it will be fixed to that 0. So now how to access it? Console.log status codes dot not found. That is how we can access. It is going to return 404. That means these are keys and these are what values you can access. Remember, it supports, actually it supports reverse mapping, enum reverse mapping. Enum reverse mapping is you can access a value based on key and you can access a key based on value. That means you can say that you can say status codes of 404. This is accessing a key based on value. That is called reverse mapping. In many interviews, they ask this question. So you can access the value with reference of key. That means what we have to do. So name dot what key. So here a frequently asked question, what is enum reverse mapping? Reverse mapping. So it allows to access keys with reference of value. With reference of value. That means here we have a name and a value. It is going to return the key. And here the important point is auto initialization is not for string type. It is only for what type? Number. If there is a previous string type, it will not allow auto initialization. You can initialize number or string types. With reference of value. So as of now, here we are using reverse mapping technique And through reverse mapping, we are trying to access tsc index.ts. It will return both of them. This is the value and this key. We are accessing the keys and values. Keys and values. So this is one example to understand. And important is, this is example. Important is, if it is a string type, you can have mixed. For example, I can say that, so okay, that means this is success. So response ready, something like this. You can put anything. But after that, you defined something like method and not initializing a value. It is error. Why it is error? Because auto initializing is not supported because previous is an string. And you have to initialize with the some number 302. Right? If it is a string previously, it is not allowed. If it is not a string, then it is allowed. So, however, you can have a mixed combination of string and number. You can have even expression. But remember, only string and number allowed. Boolean is not allowed. Boolean values or Boolean expressions are not allowed in a constant. Why? Because Boolean is not a constant actually. Why Boolean is not a constant? It will change true to false, false to true. Then how it can be constant? Boolean itself is not a constant. Then how you can store in a constant? You cannot store in a constant. So the key point here is Boolean Boolean values and expressions are not allowed in enum, are not allowed in enum. Why they are not allowed in enum? Because Boolean itself is not a constant. Boolean itself is not a constant. Expressions are allowed, but Boolean expressions are not allowed. Actually, in interviews, some people ask, like, tell me which operator is not supported in enum. Which operator is not supported enum means, because we said that enum support expression. Expressions are built by using operators. Tell me which operator is not supported in enum. Which operator is not supported in enum? Any operator that returns a boolean is not supported in enum. That means greater than, less than, not. They are returning boolean. Any boolean operator will be not be supported, right? So that means tricky question can be there. They can ask like that. For example, you see here, suppose I am using enum and calculate, and this calculate enum is having a is equal to 10, b is equal to 20, c is equal to a plus b. It can have. That means you can have an expression console.log addition is equal to, and we can access here. So calculate.c, it is going to print the addition. That means you can have numbers, string, and even an expression in the enum. You can have the expressions in the enum. You can see it is going to show that. But you cannot have a Boolean expression. So slash is okay. Asterisk is okay. But greater than not okay. Because it cannot return a Boolean. So any another type is okay. It can handle that and it can define. That is the concept of constants. A collection of constant values, how you can configure and how you can use, right? That is the concept of constants. This is generics. Another one is what? Enums. Enums. Now, these are the basic points enough. Now we will start a project with the TypeScript with a concept of modules and namespaces. We will learn about them. That we'll see in next session. Tomorrow we will do that. In tomorrow session, we will start now using TypeScript in our React project. So tomorrow again, now we will start React with the TypeScript. And I will show one example of how to recreate existing JavaScript based example in TypeScript. Then we will design one complete project on TypeScript. So that will get a clarity. In that we will put Redux and we will learn testing, deployment, and everything. That means we will finish all our concepts with TypeScript project. So Redux related concepts and deployment testing related concepts we are going to see in this final project. With that we finish all the concepts, right? Then we will continue in next session. Tomorrow we will do that. Okay.